"You waste medicine on enemies?" The German officer said it with a smile. Not a large smile, not the kind a victorious man wears. He was no longer victorious. His pistol had been taken. His field cap was gone. Mud covered one side of his gray uniform, and 2 American soldiers stood close enough to remind him that the battle outside the farmhouse was over. But his contempt had survived capture. Across the room, Corporal James Bell knelt beside a wounded German machine gunner and worked a bandage tight around the man's side. Bell's hands were dirty with mud, iodine, and exhaustion. He had not slept properly in 2 days. He had American wounded waiting behind him, one of them sitting against the wall with a blood-soaked sleeve and a face pale from shock. The German officer looked at that American soldier, then back at Bell. "You treat him first?" Bell did not look up. "I treat the worst wound first." That answer made the German officer laugh under his breath. To him, this was weakness. A soft army wasting supplies on men who had been shooting at them hours earlier. A sentimental army too foolish to understand that enemies remained enemies, even when they were bleeding on a farmhouse floor. The American private waiting against the wall heard the laugh. He did not complain. He only said, quietly, "Doc knows who needs him first." That was when George Patton stepped into the doorway. No shouting followed, no threat, no dramatic speech. Patton looked at the German wounded man, then at Bell's hands still working, then at the officer who had mocked him. "Is he breathing?" The German officer blinked. Patton's voice stayed flat. "Then he gets treated." The German officer thought he was watching American weakness. Patton would make him watch long enough to understand it was discipline. The farmhouse had become an aid station because it still had a roof. That was all anyone required of it by then. The windows were cracked. The door hung crooked on one hinge. Straw from the loft had fallen through shell-split boards and mixed with mud tracked in by boots, stretchers, and men who had stopped caring what floor they were lying on. Outside, the last bursts of rifle fire had moved farther down the road, fading into the distance as the Americans pushed through the edge of the village. Inside, the war had not ended. It had only changed rooms. Men lay along the walls under torn blankets and field jackets. Some wore American olive drab, some wore German gray. In the yellow light of 2 lanterns, the colors mattered less than the sounds. Breathing, coughing, low voices asking for water. Boots stepping carefully between bodies. Metal instruments being set down on a wooden table that had once been used for family meals. Corporal James Bell moved through it like a man too tired to waste motion. He did not ask who hated whom. He did not ask which rifle a man had carried that morning. He asked the questions medics asked when there was too little time and too much pain. Can he breathe? Is he bleeding through? Can he wait? Will he die if he does? Those questions built the order of the room, not rank, not nationality, not revenge, triage. A private with a shattered sleeve could wait if his breathing was steady. A German with a wound that could close his lungs could not. An American sergeant gritting his teeth by the stove might be passed over for a captured enemy who had already stopped speaking clearly. That was not kindness in the soft way civilians imagined it. It was procedure. It was duty stripped down to its hardest shape. Bell's hands were cracked from cold and iodine. His eyes looked hollow from 2 days without real sleep. When he knelt beside a man, he did not become gentle exactly. He became precise. Bandage here, pressure there. Morphine marked, tag written. Next man. Private Samuel Reed sat against the wall, one arm wrapped tight, waiting his turn without complaint. Across from him, a German soldier shook under a blanket, while Bell checked him again. Near the doorway, Hauptmann Karl Weiss watched all of it, with a face that had not yet learned defeat. He saw Americans saving Germans. He saw German wounded receiving water from the same canteens as American wounded. He saw no one asking permission from hatred. And because he did not understand discipline without cruelty, he mistook what he saw for weakness. Corporal Bell did not see uniforms first. He saw breathing, That was the rule inside the farmhouse, whether anyone liked it or not. A man could be American, German, officer, private, prisoner, friend, stranger. None of that mattered if his breath was failing faster than the others. Bell moved toward the German machine gunner because the man was losing color too quickly. The German lay on a blanket near the center of the room, one boot still caked with field mud, both hands pressed weakly against his side, as if he could hold himself together by force. His eyes followed Bell with the confused fear of a man who expected punishment and instead found a medic kneeling beside him. Bell cut away the cloth. He checked the wound. Then he called for pressure and clean dressing. Private Samuel Reed watched from the wall, with his own arm wrapped tight against his chest. Reed was American. Reed had been there when German fire came out of the village. Reed had every reason to hate the uniform lying in front of Bell. But Reed had been in enough aid stations to understand the order of need. His wound hurt. The German's wound could kill him faster. That was the difference. Hauptmann Weiss did not understand that difference. He stood near the doorway under guard, face stiff, eyes sharp, watching Bell work on the German soldier while Reed waited. Weiss had seen American firepower that afternoon. He had seen American tanks, artillery, rifles, and discipline under attack. But this kind of discipline confused him. To him, war still had to mean loyalty only to one's own side. German blood mattered to Germans. American blood mattered to Americans. Anything else looked sentimental, disordered, weak. Bell tightened the bandage. The German soldier gasped. Weiss gave a short laugh. "You treat the enemy before your own?" The room heard it. A few men looked over. Bell did not. He kept his hands where they were and answered as if Weiss had asked about the weather. "I treat the worst wound first." There was no anger in it. That seemed to irritate Weiss more than anger would have. A man can argue with insult. He can answer contempt with contempt. But Bell gave him nothing to push against. No speech, no hatred, no plea to be understood. Only procedure. Reed leaned his head back against the wall and spoke without lifting his voice. "Doc knows who needs him first." That sentence did more damage to Weiss than Bell's answer, because the American waiting in pain did not protest. He accepted the order of the room, and Weiss began to realize that what he had mistaken for softness was not soft at all. Hauptmann Karl Weiss did not mock Bell because he misunderstood what he was seeing. He mocked him because he understood just enough to hate it. The German wounded man was still breathing, because an American medic had chosen to keep his hands steady. That fact sat in the room like an insult Weiss could not answer. He had been captured. His village position had fallen. His men were lying on the same floor as the Americans they had tried to kill. And now one of those Americans was saving a German life without asking permission from anger. Weiss needed that to be weakness, so he called it weakness. "You Americans are strange," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You fight like devils, then play nursemaid to the men who shot you." No one answered at first. Bell was tying off the dressing. His face remained lowered. A drop of iodine ran across his knuckle, mixed with mud, and disappeared into the cuff of his sleeve. He reached for a tag, marked the treatment, and moved his hand to check the German soldier's breathing again. Weiss watched, irritated by the silence. A cruel man expects cruelty to be answered. An arrogant man expects anger to prove he has landed the blow. But Bell gave him neither. He did not defend himself. He did not defend the army. He did not tell Weiss about rules, honor, or humanity. He kept working. That made the insult smaller. Weiss looked toward Private Reed, still waiting against the wall. "And you accept this?" Weiss asked. "An enemy treated before you?" Reed's face tightened from pain, but his voice stayed calm. "He needs the doc worse than I do." Weiss stared at him. That answer did not fit the world he wanted to believe in. He expected resentment. He expected complaint. He expected the American soldier to demand his own blood be counted first. Instead, Reed leaned back and closed his eyes. Major Thomas Greer, standing near the doorway, heard enough. He stepped closer, not angry, but watchful. Weiss noticed him and smiled thinly. "You call this discipline?" Greer did not answer. Because behind Weiss, another pair of boots had stopped in the doorway. Bell did not see them. He was already reaching for the next man. Weiss did not see them either. He was too busy mistaking silence for victory. Then Patton's voice came from behind him. "No," Patton said. Weiss turned. Patton's face was hard, unreadable, and completely calm. "We call it control." Patton did not raise his voice. That disappointed Weiss more than anger would have. A shouted insult could be resisted. A threat could be hated. A blow could be remembered as proof that Americans were no different from anyone else once the battle ended. But Patton gave him none of those comforts. He only looked past Weiss into the room. At the German soldier Bell had just bandaged. At Private Reed waiting against the wall. At the medics moving from man to man, without asking which uniform had fired first. Then Patton spoke to the guards. "Let him stand there." Weiss turned slightly. "Stand where?" Patton pointed toward the center of the aid station. "Where he can see." No one explained further. That made it worse. Weiss was moved a few steps into the room, close enough to smell iodine, damp wool, mud, and old smoke clinging to every coat. He stood between two American guards while the aid station continued around him as if his contempt did not matter. That was the first lesson. His opinion did not change the order of the room. Bell moved to the next wounded man. American, then German, then American again. Not by flag, not by hatred, not by revenge. By need. A German private with shallow breathing was lifted onto a table before an American soldier whose arm had been wrapped tight enough to wait. Reed watched it happen and said nothing. Another American handed Bell a roll of gauze without being asked, even after seeing it pressed against a German wound a moment later. Weiss tried to hold his face still, but the room gave him no easy enemy. No one begged for his approval. No one apologized for treating his men. No one looked proud of it either. That confused him most. If this had been mercy, someone might have wanted credit. If this had been softness, someone might have needed to explain it. But Bell worked like a man following a rule older than the insult thrown at him. Patton watched Weiss watch. Only after several minutes did he ask the first question. "Did your man receive treatment?" Weiss did not answer. Patton waited. The German officer's mouth tightened. Yes. Was he beaten? No. Was he refused because he was German? Again, Weiss did not answer quickly enough. Patton stepped closer. Was he? No. Patton looked back toward Bell, who still had not turned around. The corporal was bent over another wounded man, marking a tag with tired fingers. Patton's voice remained flat. "That is not weakness." Weiss looked at him then. For the first time, the smile was gone. Patton did not continue. Not yet. He let the aid station speak first. Weiss finally found his voice again. "You call it mercy," he said. Patton looked at him as if the word itself had missed the point. No. The answer came so quickly that Weiss stopped. Patton stepped farther into the aid station. The lantern light caught the edges of his coat, the hard line of his jaw, the polished stars that seemed almost out of place among mud, blankets, and torn field dressings. He looked at Bell. The corporal was pressing a bandage against another wounded man now, not because Patton had entered, not because Weiss was watching, but because the man in front of him needed pressure held, and Bell's hands were the nearest hands trained to do it. Patton turned back to Weiss. "This is not mercy." Weiss frowned. Patton's voice stayed flat. "Mercy can be emotion. This is discipline." The room kept moving around them. A canteen passed from one soldier to another. A medic called for more dressings. Someone coughed behind a blanket. A German prisoner groaned in a language most of the Americans did not answer, but Bell still turned his head toward the sound. Patton pointed slightly, not dramatically, just enough. "That man does not decide with hatred. He does not decide with revenge. He does not ask who pulled the trigger this morning. He asks who dies first if he does nothing. Weiss said nothing. Patton continued. You think cruelty is strength because it is easy to understand. A man hates his enemy, so he lets him suffer. Simple. Fast. Animal. That word landed harder than if Patton had shouted. Animal. Then Patton looked around the room. These men are tired. Some of them lost friends today. Some of them were shot by the same uniforms lying on this floor. They have every excuse to look away. He paused. But they do not. Bell moved past them carrying bloody gauze to a bucket, then returned to the table without ever looking for approval. His shoulders were bent with fatigue, but his rhythm did not break. Patton watched him for a second. That is discipline. Weiss's face had changed. Not softened, not humbled completely, but the easy contempt was gone, and something colder had taken its place. The discomfort of a man forced to see strength where he had expected weakness. Patton gave him the final line quietly. A weak army needs cruelty to feel strong. A disciplined army can defeat an enemy, then still control its hands when the enemy can no longer fight. No one in the room applauded. No one needed to. Bell kept working, and Weiss had nothing left to mock. Weiss kept standing where Patton had placed him. At first, he tried to look bored. Then he tried to look disgusted. After a while, both expressions became too heavy to hold. The aid station did not perform for him. That was what wore him down. No American tried to convince him. No medic asked whether he now understood. No wounded man turned the room into a lesson. The order simply continued, quiet and relentless, until Weiss had no choice but to watch it as something real. A German prisoner was given water. An American private was told to wait. A German wound was checked again because the breathing had changed. An American sergeant, pale and sweating by the stove, lifted his own canteen and passed it to a man in gray without looking at Weiss at all. That small movement struck harder than a speech. It had no audience in mind. It did not ask to be admired. It was just discipline, moving through exhausted men who still remembered what they were supposed to be. Weiss looked toward Bell. The corporal's shoulders sagged now. His sleeves were stiff with old mud. His hands moved slower than before, but not carelessly. He checked tags, changed pressure, listened when men spoke too quietly for anyone else to hear. An insult had been thrown at him. A general had entered the room, and still, Bell's world had narrowed to the next wound, the next breath, the next decision that could not wait for anger to finish talking. Weiss finally said, "Lower this time." "He does this for all of them?" Patton did not look at him. "He does it because that is his duty." Weiss watched another American soldier shift aside so Bell could reach a German wounded man more easily. The movement was small, almost impatient, not gentle in any sentimental way, but it was controlled. That was the word Weiss could not escape now. Control. Not softness, not surrender. Control. Cruelty would have been easier. Weiss knew that. Any defeated officer could understand revenge. Any tired soldier could understand letting the enemy suffer. That required no greatness. No training. No standard higher than anger. But this room had standards even after the guns stopped. Patton stepped beside him. "Cruelty is easy after a battle," he said. "Control is harder." Weiss did not answer. The old contempt had left his face, but nothing noble had replaced it. Only discomfort, only the look of a man seeing a form of strength he had not been taught to respect. Across the room, Bell tied off another bandage and reached for the next tag. He still did not know he had become the lesson, and that was why the lesson worked. When it was over, Patton did not ask Weiss if he had learned anything. That would have made the moment smaller. A lesson that has to be explained too loudly has usually failed. This one had not failed. It was there on the floor, in the lantern light, in the dirty bandages, in the American private who waited without complaint, and in the German prisoner, who was still breathing because an enemy medic had refused to let hatred decide the order of care. Patton looked once more across the room. Bell was still working. He had not stood straighter because a general was present. He had not slowed down to appear noble. He had not turned toward Weiss to see whether the insult had been defeated. He was too tired for theater, and too disciplined to need it. That was why Patton respected the moment. Not because it was soft, because it was hard. It is easy to hate a man after he has fired at you. It is easy to look away when his uniform is different, and his hands are too weak to hold a weapon. It is easy to call cruelty justice, when the room still smells of smoke, and the names of dead friends have not yet settled in the mind. But easy things do not prove discipline. Control does. Patton turned to Bell only once. "Keep working, Corporal." Bell nodded without looking up. "Yes, sir." That was all. No medal pinned in the farmhouse. No speech for the wounded. No grand declaration for the German officer to carry away like a clean moral painted over a dirty war. Just an order. Keep working. Because real discipline was not a sentence, it was a habit. Weiss was taken from the room soon after. He did not look back with admiration. He did not suddenly become a different man. War rarely changes men that cleanly. But his contempt no longer stood as tall as it had when he first laughed at Bell. He had seen something his pride could not explain. An army that could destroy his position, capture his men, and still treat a wounded enemy without asking hatred for permission. That was not weakness. That was order. And sometimes, order is what separates soldiers from killers. Patton did not show the German officer mercy. He showed him control. Because a weak army needs cruelty to feel strong. A disciplined army can win the fight and still keep its hands steady after the enemy can no longer fight back.